All right, all this talk about the rally at Kempton Park, it just brings to mind a lot of other fond memories about amateur radio and the UK. I guess my connection with UK amateur radio began as a kid. I grew up in New York City and the suburbs of New York and got involved in ham radio, as many of you did, at the age of 12 or 13. And I can remember those early days when I was trying to make DX contacts. I have to tell you that for me, among the most meaningful DX contacts that I made were with UK radio amateurs. I don't think the UK was my first DX, but it was always something special about contacting a G station. And it's hard to describe, but first of all, it was very clearly across the pond, almost the quintessential across the pond contact for us, and the G calls and the way the G station would communicate in CW in Morse, it just, in my 12 or 13-year-old mind, it conjured up images. I always had the picture of a very dignified gentleman over at the other end, probably wearing a sweater, probably one of those sweaters with the the elbow pads, smoking a pipe, having a hot cuppa right there in front of him, probably out in a really nice country cottage, just sending me Morse code, and there I was communicating with Great Britain. It was just a wonderful feeling, and there was something special about it. I mean, I guess the most thrilling DX experience that I had as a kid was when I worked ZL2 ACP. The first time I crossed the mighty Pacific, and that was really a big one. But there was something special about every one of those G contacts that I had. Later on, much later on, when I found myself living in the Azores Islands of Portugal, we were there from 2000 to 2003. I was CU2JL, and one of the really important side benefits of being posted to the Azores was that I was almost exactly one ionospheric F-zone skip to the United Kingdom. So as I look at my logbooks from that period, I see that a very high percentage of my contacts were with UK radio amateurs, and that was great fun. It was I spent most of my time on 17 meters. We still had some sunspots at that point, so there was some propagation, and it seemed like every time I turned on the radio, I was talking to a very congenial bunch of guys, most of whom, or many of whom anyway, were from the UK. G3IUE Morris out there in Penzance was one of the regulars, and many others, and it was just great fun. Ironically, when I moved to London and inside the skip zone, and when I became a local, the number of contacts that I had with UK radio amateurs actually dropped off quite a bit. We moved to the United Kingdom. We moved to London in 2003, and my employer, a well-known operation with offices at Grosvenor Square, decided that we needed to live close to the embassy. So they put us in a very posh neighborhood in South Kensington, Chelsea, in the Royal Borough, which was great fun, and we really enjoyed our time there. My wife and the kids especially enjoyed living in that part of London. I must say I was a bit disappointed at first, because as do all true radio amateurs, when I got to the new location, I began immediately to look for signs of radio activity. I don't mean like uranium. I mean amateur radio activity. I was looking around for antennas. Every once in a while I'd spot one, but then I'd discover that it was, over the Bulgarian embassy or something, and it was not one of ours. Or, you know, I even in the early days would spot a license plate that had what seemed to be a ham radio call sign, and I was disappointed to discover that in most cases they were just random flukes of the UK license plate system. I even searched the stores. I looked around. I tried to find a store where I could buy components or magazines or something. And there was the odd Maplins or Maplins, but that was sort of it had become kind of a pale, kind of weak substitute for Radio Shack, which was pretty pale and weak itself. But you could find all of the Gucci handbags and all of the fine art and all of the antiques and all the exotic foreign food you wanted. But I hate to say it, but in South Kensington and Chelsea, you couldn't find an electrolytic capacitor if your life depended on it. But hey, there were compensations, and it was just great to be in London and to be on the air from the UK. The GQRP Club was not really close. GQRP Club always seemed to be a bit to the north, but I did have the opportunity to meet up, like I said, with club members at the rallies and things like that. You know, the UK is, in addition to those kind of early DX experiences, the UK has always been such an important part of the hobby for me, and I think for most of my countrymen. I mean, in the QRP world, Sprat, a copy of which I have displayed right there, the GQRP Club's magazine is just so important. I have my collection over there on the bookshelf, and I've commented on the Solder Smoke podcast that I rarely leave the house without at least one or two copies of Sprat stuck in my pocket. You never know. I mean, guys, be careful. I don't recommend leaving the house without a copy or two of Sprat, because, you know, there are going to be those moments where your wife or daughter needs to go into the shoe store, and you're going to be out there on the high street, and I'm telling you, if you don't have a Sprat with you, it's not pleasant. So bring a copy of Sprat when your family members drag you off to the shoe store. I really recommend it. The RSGB handbook, I have it over on the shelf also. It always seems to provide the kind of explanation or diagram that I'm looking for. I mean, it's really a wonderful publication. And I have to say something about another, I think, real institution of the UK amateur world, and that's Pat Hawker, G3VA, and his column, Technical Topics. I have purchased all of the compilations. I think there are all 4 of the compilations covering Pat's 4 decades of contribution to amateur radio literature, and it's just a treasure for all of us. And that's something else that I very often grab and take with me as I'm heading out the door. And it never fails to provide the kind of reading that I'm looking for, the kind of information and inspiration that we all need as radio amateurs and home brewers. So anyway, I think that should be the end of part 2. Let's now take a pause, and I'll put together part 3.